morning comes from the lectionary from Matthew chapter 14, verses 22 through 33. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed them, he went on up a mountainside by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there all alone. But the boat was already a considerable distance from the land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. During the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid." "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, beginning to sink, cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately Jesus reached down his hand and caught him. "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." May the Lord bless the reading of this word. Now, we don't know all the careers of the disciples, what they did for a living before they started following Jesus. But we do know that 4 out of 12 of them were fishermen. Peter, James, Andrew, and John. They were all fishermen. So they weren't scared to hop into a boat when Jesus told them to hop into a boat and to go by themselves up ahead of Jesus. They were quite comfortable on the water. In fact, I think that for Peter, I think being out there on the open water, that was like his sanctuary. That's where he got his mind together. You know, whenever he needed to get his thoughts together, he would go out there in a boat, and usually he'd go fishing. Whenever he was stressed out, whenever he needed to operate on autopilot for a while. Have you ever been there where you're just so stressed out, you just need to have that mind-numbing experience of doing something that you can do without thinking about it? For Peter, that was fishing. And we know that from John's Gospel. We read that after Easter, when Jesus had died on the cross, and Peter was trying to figure all that out and what that meant, well, in John chapter 21, Peter looks to the other disciples and says, "I'm going out to fish." So I don't think Peter argued one bit when Jesus said, "Get in a boat and going up ahead of him." He didn't argue one bit. In fact, I think he was probably glad to get into that boat, glad to feel normal for just a little bit, because it had been a long day. He was sick of the crowds. He was sick of all the noise, and looking forward to some peace and quiet. So he didn't argue one bit. He just got in that boat. You see, the day that this story took place, it was right after what we heard last Sunday, when Jesus fed the 5,000. The disciples, well, they wanted to go home hours earlier. We're out here in the middle of nowhere. It's getting late. Jesus, just send these people home so we can, get on with our day, so that they can get back to where they belong. They pleaded with Jesus. But Jesus, he insisted on feeding the crowds. He said, "We've got to feed everyone dinner." So the evening lingered on. So at the end of the day, Jesus looks at them and says, "You guys just go up ahead of me, and I'll catch up with you later. I'll take care of the crowds. I'll make sure everybody gets home on time." Thank goodness, because it's been a long day. But their leisurely boat ride, it got caught short when evening came. It didn't end the way they expected. Now, Peter loved being out in the water at night. He's been known to fish all night. He liked fishing at night because at night you weren't sweating in the sun, you weren't wiping sweat left and right. When you're out there by yourself on that water, it's just calm, cooler, quiet. But this evening was disturbing because the wind started blowing in. It didn't quit. And as the wind picked up, the boat started to rock. And the later it got, the more the boat started rocking, back and forth, back and forth. And Peter, he didn't realize until it was too late that it was a full-blown storm. and the rest of the disciples, they looked at each other and said, what are we going to do? And they tried to get back to shore, but the waves were just too hard. Giant waves were slapping against the side of the boat. The currents were keeping them out there. They couldn't make it to shore. So what did the disciples do? Well, most of them huddled into one corner of that boat. They were scared for their life in the midst of that storm. Peter, he goes up for some fresh air. Maybe he was getting a little seasick. All he could think about were those 12 baskets of leftover bits of food and leftover bits of fish. And the more he thought about those 12 baskets, the sicker he became. Boy, I wish I'd had just one last piece of salt herring. But Peter, he wasn't as scared as the rest of the disciples because he was a tough guy. Peter was a tough guy, and this wasn't his first storm. I imagine little Simon Peter, he was a boy out there fishing with his dad. I imagine a storm coming up, and rather than hiding under his covers, this 8-year-old boy, he goes up and leans over the railing. He's fascinated by the waves, fascinated by the foam and the big powerful waves as they roll, as they morph, as they almost seem to take shapes. Boy, get back over here, get from behind that railing before you fall overboard, his dad would yell. As he got older, he developed a little bit more respect for the ocean, a little bit more fear and reverence. You've got to have some fear and reverence for something that big and powerful. And one big swoosh, the sea could swallow you up. But he never could quite shake his curiosity. Now Peter's confidence, it came from his own strength. Years of pulling in those heavy nets full of fish. He had quite a build. He didn't need a membership down at Planet Fitness. His big guns came from years of hard work. I wonder if that's why Jesus named him Peter. You know, Peter, that's Greek for rock. And I think Jesus named him that for a lot of reasons. Maybe he was stubborn. Maybe he was thick-headed at times, a head full of rocks. But no doubt one of the reasons that Jesus called him that was because he was built. He was solid as a rock. But when you visualize Peter, I want you to think about that actor and professional wrestler, Dwayne Johnson, better known as The Rock. So here we have big old Peter out there on a boat with the other disciples. One stormy night. He's half queasy, half cocky, and a little concerned about what he sees. When all of a sudden, he spots something strange way out there in the distance. It looks like somebody in the water. Is that what it is? Is that really a person out there? They must have a death wish in this storm. It's crazy. And then this figure kept getting a little closer and a little closer. And as he crept closer, he realized that it was a man walking on the water. Hey guys, come up here, you've got to see this. He yells down to the other disciples. They lift their heads up just high enough to peer over the side of that boat. And they see this figure walking towards them, and they scream out in terror. They say, it's a ghost. It's a ghost. It's got to be. What else? What else could explain it? But Peter wasn't convinced. He kept looking. He kept looking off that boat into the water, staring at that figure. While he was staring off into that salty mist, he heard a voice that seemed to drown out all the crashing of the waves around him. A voice just as clear as a bell, and it said, don't be scared. It's me, Jesus. When he hears that, he gets just as excited as that 8-year-old boy leaning over the railing. When he realizes what Jesus is doing, well, something snaps at him. His childhood fantasy of just jumping out of that boat and running like the wind, all of a sudden it seems possible. And he gets excited. He says, Lord, if it's you, if it's really you, then I want to get out there and I want to do that too. I want to walk on that water. He does just that. Jesus says, come on. And he goes out there. He goes out there and he's doing it. He's actually walking on the surface of the water too. Amazing.